Teamwork Arts podcast, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sarthak. The idea, of course, is to go behind the scenes and try and figure out the thoughts behind the actions of the people who make the art. And from the art of diplomacy to the art of, I guess it is interrelated, isn't it? The manipulation of words, would that be a good way to put it, Mr.
Yes,
Swarup?
I think so. I think, many people ask this question that how come so many Indian diplomats have become novelists?
Sure.
And the answer I always give is that, the one thing we are trained in is to use words very carefully. Because, one wrong nuance can send bilateral relationship, tumbling, with the wrong choice of word. So I think is the felicity with words, with which we are trained, that makes it easier if you want to transition from writing your dull, drab official reports to fiction or something else.
That's of course Mr. Vikas Swarup. In case you haven't realized it as of now, so many hats that sometimes the head seems a little heavy, doesn't it, Mr. Swarup?
No, it's just two hats. I call myself a diplomat who writes. So I don't call myself a writer who's masquerading as a diplomat. For me, my day job comes first. As you know, I am a member of the Indian Foreign Service. Have been since 1986. I started my novelist career very late in life, when I was more than 40 years old, when I was posted in London. And since then, I have written 2 other novels. So, I wrote my first novel in 2003. We are now talking in 2021. Yeah. So only 3 novels in the last, 18 years?
Sure.
Tells you that, what comes first for me.
Of course. But, considering that that the foreign services usually end up being quite the fodder for fiction, and you writing fiction that has won itself, I don't know how many awards. Have you? Do you remember the number? Have you lost count already?
No. I mean, look, the film version of the book Q&A, my first book, did very well, as you all know. It won 8 Oscars.
8 Oscars.
Yeah, it won 8 Oscars. It won Golden Globes. It won BAFTAs. I think in total, if I'm not mistaken, it won 76 awards.
Sure.
Yeah, but the book also did quite well. The book was written in 2003. It was published in 2005, and the movie came out, as you know, in end 2008. But even before the movie came out, it had gone into 36 translations.
That's right.
Now it's in 43, so maybe you could say 6 came as a result of the success of the film. But I think the book stood its own ground, and I think it did quite well.
There's always this debate of the book versus the movie debate. Where do you stand on which side of the debate?
Yeah, look, I mean, as the writer, I would always be in favor of the book.
Sure.
Because I think a book has certain qualities which a film can never match. For one, a book, is a twofold process. You read the words on the page that the writer has created, and then you imagine those words in your head.
For sure.
Whereas a film is already fully formed.
Yes.
And that's the big difference. So, for instance, if you are reading Harry Potter, then isn't it in our nature that we try to imagine ourselves as Harry Potter?
Of course.
With glasses and carrying a broom or whatever.
Of course.
But you imagine yourself as Harry Potter. But the moment the film comes out, Daniel Radcliffe is Harry Potter. Yes. He has colonized your imagination.
Absolutely.
You can no longer place yourself in that position because the imagination has been colonized by the film. And I think that's the big difference. Of course, a film has certain things which a book can never have. A film has music, it has locations and things like that. But then a book is so much richer because a book has interior monologue. A book has side plots, subplots, and you can go into a very labyrinthine kind of a maze in a book. But a film is too much in your face. It goes from A to B to C to D.
Absolutely. Talking of colonization of imagination, it's an absolutely wonderful phrase, and in today's times, it's becoming a little fraught because motives get attributed to imagination now, and there's increasing talk of imagination being shrunk into the Excel sheet of conformity, so to speak. You think it's getting a little difficult to express yourself nowadays?
Look, I don't want to get into a political debate on this one, but certainly I think what is happening is 2 things have happened. People's attention spans have shrunk.
Yes.
So that's why, even profound political discussions are carried out through the 240 character limit of Twitter. That's one. And number 2, I think people's tolerance for different things is also shrinking.
Sure.
And that's why people take umbrage very easily now. And that's why I think writers, artists have to look over their shoulder to see that they are not offending any sensibilities and things like that. I think the only flexibility you have at the moment is to write science fiction fantasy, where your novel is set in some Andromeda galaxy, where whatever happens there cannot be attributed to things happening on the ground.
Mr. Swarup, it's very interesting right now that at this time, and we were talking about this earlier as well with Quasar particularly, about the fact that we are a country where the Shankaracharya had to go across the country convincing every school of thought that he was worthy of being the Shankaracharya, and those debates would continue for months if not years, and then and only then would a thought be accepted as acceptable. The space for debate seems to be shrinking quite, and I don't think it's a national phenomenon or it's bounded by geography, but does that affect your work not only as a diplomat but as a writer as well? Because art in its entirety does also espouse a little bit of responsibility as well, does it not?
That's true, and I think since I combine two hats in one, I'm a diplomat, I'm a writer. As a diplomat, I have to always choose my words very, very carefully.
For sure.
Because as I said, if you speak out of turn or you speak something whereas the meaning is felt differently, then you have not been a good diplomat. Sure. So as they say, a good diplomat thinks 3 times before saying nothing. A writer, on the other hand, is quite different. A writer has to, call it as he sees it without pulling any punches.
For sure.
Because that's what makes a writer.
Absolutely.
But as I said, given the fraught times in which we live in, I think it is important that we try not to offend anyone's sensibilities. Yes, I think the work should speak for itself. I think what is important, what is happening now is people are viewing your work depending on who you are. Exactly. And I think that is the problem.
Sure.
When you read a novel, it should not matter at all whether the novel has been written by a diplomat or by a pauper or by a plumber or by anyone. The novel should stand on its own. But now people are viewing a work based on who it is, who's the person who has created this work. Sure. And I think the juxtaposition of that two, that is what is creating problems.
And what are your views about words as weapons? Because they are certainly being weaponized now, aren't they?
Well, words were always weapons.
Sure.
Literature always had the ability to transform societies. Literature always had the ability to inspire people, to mobilize people. So, and that's why, as you know, in most of the dictatorship regimes, the first thing that used to happen was books used to be burnt. Writers used to be incarcerated. Yes. Because they could not tolerate the kind of free speech, which could give ideas to their citizens or their subjects, so to speak.
Sure.
So I think the power of words is something which will always be there. It's just that now they have acquired a different power altogether, because with the advent of social media, one person taking outrage can then get multiplied very, very fast.
Yes. Absolutely.
So I think that is the big change that has come, that words were always weapons, but now the weaponization happens at the speed of light because of the social media platforms which are available.
Also, going back to something that you said earlier about the fact that attention spans have shrunk, and the words, the weaponization of words seem to also have been sharpened into 280 characters, if not less. What do you think? Do you think literature is still a potent vehicle to fuel thought, as potent as it was maybe?
Yes, always. I think it's another matter that literature itself has transformed, and now you have the cell phone novel as well, for instance. So yes, I think literature has had to adapt to the modalities of the 21st century. Increasingly, you are no longer seeing 1100-page novels, because as I said, attention spans have shrunk. Publishers are reluctant to publish tomes where which become door stoppers, so to speak. So from that point of view, increasingly you are seeing people trying to compress their thoughts in a more limited space.
Sure.
And that's why the advent of blogging and the popularity of blogs, for instance, and the podcast medium in which you and I are speaking, itself is a 21st century invention.
Absolutely.
Where people now don't have the time to read a full novel or a full manuscript, but they can listen to something while they are traveling in their car or something like that. Absolutely. So I think that is what is happening, and I think that's par for the course. Literature has to evolve to adapt to the new realities and to adapt to the new modalities.
Any diplomatic career as distinguished as yours, I'm sure is just a gold mine for stories. is the temptation to tell those stories high yet, Mr. Swarup? Or
well, I'm always asked this question that why don't you write a cross-cultural novel starting in Cairo, then going on to New York, ending up in St. Petersburg, that kind of a thing. And I say, yeah, I've read those novels by John le Carré and others, for instance. But for me, what really inspires me and what really interests me the most is my own country, India.
Sure.
And that's why even though I have written all three of my novels while being posted abroad, but all three novels have engaged with India. The Q&A, which became Slumdog Millionaire, set in India, Six Suspects, set in India, and The Accidental Print is also very much an Indian novel. So I write primarily for an Indian audience. Because, when a foreigner is picking up your novel, he's picking up a novel because he wants a window into India, correct? If I pick up a novel by a Chinese author or by an Ecuadorian author, I want to understand what makes Ecuadorians tick or what drives China. And I would be, getting an authentic peek into that society only if the writer has written from an authentic perspective.
But what I really, really want to know, Mr. Swarup, is that your work has always been embellished with fiction. The varnish of fiction has always made your work shine. Are we going to see an unvarnished collection of sentences from Mr. Swarup coming out anytime soon?
But look, even my fiction is unvarnished because, I have dealt with the seedy underbelly of society also in all of the novels. It's not as if I'm only writing about the call centers, the palaces, the Maharajas. I write about, society as I see it, kind of a thing. So it's not as if that, my writing is varnished or unvarnished from that point of view. I think it's important that in my novels, what I try for is that there should be a page turning consistency in terms of there has to be a hook which draws the reader in, and you want to turn the page. But after you've turned the last page and the mystery has been revealed to you, you should be left with thinking about some of the issues, some of the characters that you encountered in the novel. And I think that's the difference between a deeper novel and an airport thriller, because in the airport thriller the plot is everything. The moment the plot is revealed, because the characters don't interest you at all. You just want to know, did the nuclear bomb hit Los Angeles or not?
Of course. But there's also this thing that you're a career diplomat and you're a writer. Do the responsibilities of a career diplomat ever conflict with the responsibilities of a practitioner of art? Because there is a point. These are not parallel lines.
Yeah. Which I have already said. As I said, a writer has to call it as he sees it, whereas a diplomat has to be very, very.
And as a diplomat, I'm sure you're privy to a lot of knowledge that, as a practitioner of the art, might be in conflict. How is there a?
But that's why I have kept the two worlds quite compartmentalized. When I write fiction, then I'm putting on the hat of a fiction writer.
Sure.
I'm not writing a tourist brochure on India.
Of course.
I'm writing about some of the ugly realities also at times. Not necessarily that I want to write about that, but if they come into the novel, they come into the novel because I have to be faithful then to the character that I have created.
Right.
If my character is an 18-year-old waiter living in a slum, then he cannot be graduating from the University of Hyderabad in chapter 2.
Sure.
So his life has to follow the bars, the chawls of Mumbai, and his life has to have a lot of hardships and setbacks.
Sure.
But if I'm writing about a billionaire industrialist, then maybe I'm looking at a different strata of India altogether. So I would say that for me the important thing, as I have said, is the character and the plot.
And what about compromises of being a diplomat who has to write?
So,
and you're in a foreign land, and suddenly the thought strikes you, but there's an important meeting to go to.
No, so that's why I call myself a weekend writer.
Okay.
I only write on weekends because when I write, there are writers, of course, who can write in the crevices of the day. They get 10 minutes here, free somewhere. They get 15 minutes, and what's cooking in their head, they jot it down.
Sure.
For me, it does not work that way. I can only write when I have a clear horizon, which means 7 or 8 hours where I'm not interrupted. And also where my mind is free from deadline pressure. Right. So if, for instance, I have to make a presentation, I have to address a business conference, even though it's a weekend, my mind would be thinking about it. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? Sure. But if I have done my official bit, Monday to Friday and Saturday and Sunday are clear, then that's the time when my imagination gets hyperactive, and then I can start creating about it. But yes, you have to be careful about what you write. So obviously you do not want to write stuff which can get you into trouble. You should write about,
increasingly so now.
As I said, my last novel came out in 2013, so I have not written since then.
Sure.
But I think in Hindi there's a very good word. It's called maryada. you have to follow the maryada, and you have to follow the Lakshman Rekha of what is permissible and what is not. Sure. And if you do that, you are okay.
Finally, the vagaries of a high-pressure job with aspirations of being a literature, which you fulfilled in such an accomplished way. There are many people who want to know how that works, and there are many people with stars in their eyes, knowing about the glamour but forgetting the grind. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, look, whenever I go to universities or to schools, and I have done a lot of these talks, students ask me this question that, what do you think makes a writer? We also want to be a writer. What are the ingredients of being a writer? And I have sort of boiled it down to a 3C approach. The first thing is curiosity. You have to be curious about your world, because every work of fiction begins with what if. What if there were 12-foot people, blue-skinned, living on a planet called Navi? That was the starting point for Avatar.
Absolutely.
So I think if you're not curious about the world, you will not contemplate how that world can shift and change and metamorphose in your mind. Because then how will you create something?
Absolutely.
So I think the first thing and the very important thing is curiosity. The second thing is confidence. You have to have, writing is about taking risks, because you are not sure the plot you have developed in your head is a plot that's going to appeal to people outside your head as well.
Sure.
So unless you are confident about your writing, how can you make the rest of the world believe in your writing? Sure. So you have to have the confidence that yes, I'm taking a risk and this is a risk worth taking. And finally, the third C I say is the computer for the research. Now that's very important, especially because, as I told you, what I write in my novels is completely different from my day job.
Of course.
So I'm writing about murder and mayhem, I'm writing about betting on cricket matches, prostitution by Bedia tribal girls, which I have no personal knowledge of. So that I can only get into by research, by researching. For instance, my first novel, Q&A, was set in Dharavi. I had never visited Dharavi. I had been to other slums, as every Indian, I suppose, has seen, but I had never been to Dharavi. So I read up about 10 books on Dharavi. And then I tried to imagine in my head, okay, now I have read about Dharavi, how will it look in my imagination, in my head? And then I wrote from that perspective. So I think if you have these three things, and of course there's no substitute for hard work.
Of course.
There is no shortcut, you cannot just say, okay, let me write something and I'll finish it in 2 nights. No, it doesn't happen that way. Because, the arc of a novel is a very difficult thing.
Sure.
To keep all the messy strands in your head, from beginning to end,
Yes.
and to persevere. I think, and that's why, writing is something where people say they love the product, but they hate the process.
Yes, absolutely. But thank God you've loved the process as well, and you've given us stuff to read that's brought a smile on our faces and a shake of the head in disbelief at the beauty of it all. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for sharing these wonderful thoughts. Mr. Vikas Swarup, of course, a career diplomat and practitioner of the art of writing. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking to you.
That's the Teamwork Arts Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening.